Hello and welcome back around the bonfire. It's a pleasure to have you as we are looking forward to what is hopefully a beautiful Saturday and a Chicago Fire victory. Smaller crew today, but that's all right. We're joined by the best in the business. I've got Tim here with me. Tim, how's your hump day treating you, man?
It's amazing. It feels like we just saw MLS and now there's like a pretty big slate of midweek games happening and the Fire are playing in it'll be like 72 hours or so when you're listening to this, I guess. It's comes at you fast this time of year.
Yeah, it certainly does. Time, what does Seal say? Time keeps on slipping into the future, right? Shout out Space Jam. But hey, speaking of things that are slipping, that was a terrible segue. Sorry, everybody. But anywho, there's plenty to talk about, plenty to discuss.
Speaking of things that are slipping, that's segue. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, the Chicago Fire, I can see my fiance across the room laughing at me right now, apparently. Anyway, Chicago
You were
Fire
laughing too, so it's laughing with us. It's laughing. We're all laughing together at it.
Absolutely.
We saw it coming and there was no way to avoid it. It was like one of those car crashes. You're just like, this is going to happen. And, I'm just committed at this point.
Speaking of something that's going to happen and you have no control over it, Chicago Fire heading down to Orlando to face Orlando City this weekend in a game where Orlando City could not be coming in hotter and the Fire could not be coming in colder, for lack of a better word, if that's possible, right? A few little bits of news before we hop into that will all kind of present themselves later as we talk through this game. First and foremost, a massive shout to Chris Brady as he is officially called up to the friendlies roster for the U.S. men's national team in replace of Patrick Schulte, who is expected to miss extended time. So for all the negative things I've said about Patrick Schulte, we wish him well. Hope he's back on the field soon, but I am excited to see Chris Brady in that role. Tim, kind of a quick hit on expectations for the Fire should Brady get called up to the Gold Cup squad as well.
So just to be clear, he's kind of the fourth. I don't know where the depth chart is, right? But I mean, the other goalkeepers that are in the same camp, and this is technically the pre-Gold Cup camp, not the Gold Cup roster, although there's overlap, right? He would have been eligible to get called in either way because that's what that 60-man roster is for. Are Matt Freese, Zach Steffen, and Matt Turner. Patrick Schulte, I don't know where he was on the depth chart in Botch's thinking. I would suspect that he may have been the fourth out of those. The only kind of counter argument might be, if Matt Turner ends up finding some move to a club that could potentially, want to see him play on a regular basis, that getting to that camp as quickly as possible would be the priority for him. So, I think it's not 100% clear that Brady will be getting further than this stage. And even if he does make it to the roster, I sort of suspect, being the last one added, right? Like you think you're probably the goalkeeper. So probably not going to get minutes, but it would still be an opportunity for him to be in the camp, which starts in Chicago. So the joke that Alex Campbell from CHGO made was all he has to do is show up to work and just put on a different shirt. And that's kind of true. So, but yeah. If the Fire are out, it's going to be a difficult position. They can recall Dowd now from Fire 2 whenever they want. And so that would be the Fire's backup goalkeeper. And, I think that Jeff Gall played better than I think a lot of people expected to in the limited time he was given in a difficult situation. So I don't think that you feel great about the prospect of not having Chris Brady for a month when the Fire were finally hoping to show that they had it all together. But at the same time, I think that you're feeling better than you did a few weeks ago about that prospect.
Absolutely. I think in the first, never having seen Jeff Gall in action in MLS, it certainly bodes well. His first few performances, right? I made the point earlier. The only person who scored on him is Sam Rogers. So a good start to his MLS career. But yeah, very exciting for Chris. Obviously, wish him the best.
Also, Sam Rogers' first MLS goal. So all kinds of firsts happening there, but only one that anybody wants to remember at the end of the day.
Oh man. Yeah. But yeah, we'll cross our fingers that he gets into camp and maybe gets the opportunity to see some time and earn himself a senior cap. Purely as fans of the national team, I think that would be exciting as well.
Yeah, and
moving.
as fans of Chris Brady, right? Like he's, we've seen his growth, we've seen his maturity, and seeing him take that next step, I think is something that you just want to see for guys that you think have it in them, and I think he's one of those guys.
And I think you could, to be fair, you could call this a, meatball take. You could say I'm a homer. I think you look at those four guys. I don't know that any of them stand head and shoulders above the rest. You give Matt Turner the nod out of respect for what he's done with the national side, but I don't know that Matt Freese or Zach Steffen, excuse me, is that much better than Chris Brady, right? I think they're probably farther along. They're more developed, but in terms of natural ability and who you're hoping can play in 26, I don't know that any of those guys jumps off the page more than any other.
Yeah, agreed. And I think the thing with both Schultz and Brady is you're looking past 26, and I think that Brady has the highest ceiling out of all of those guys. It seems like Steffen is Poch's guy. I mean, he proves us wrong because I was wondering what the heck Colorado was doing bringing him back last year. This year, he really turned it on. He had some good appearances with the national team. It kind of cooled off since then, but I think long run skill ceiling and all that, I would put him at the top of the pool, and maybe that is a homer thing. I think that part of it is also just seeing more of him and seeing more about the situations, because
100%.
he hasn't been able to give you as many of those like highlight reel moments, because he makes 2 or 3 really big saves in a game. And by the way, his chances of doing that have been lower over the past couple seasons because the Fire didn't have a good defensive structure ahead of him. So he was not, it's not like he had to only cover the one guy that was coming in on goal because he knew that his center backs had the other angles. He sort of had to try to cover the whole net, and you're not going to be in a position a lot to make that good save. But he makes some big saves, and then the Fire end up like losing 3-1 or 4-2, like whatever it would be, right? And you're like, well, it's hard to look at the saves when you look at the goals that come in just from a high level perspective of like how good of a goalkeeper is he. So the better structure in front of him, I think, is going to bode well for his future, both with the Fire and the U.S. men's national team.
Absolutely. Yeah. Could not agree more. Last thing I'll say, I've always felt I've been pretty vocal about this. I think Chris Brady is easily the best natural shot stopper in MLS. I don't think there's a better keeper at that specifically. He's always suffered in his distribution. I think we've seen that really improve over the last 3 months. So excited for the opportunity. We will move on here now to the less exciting, less fun news. It was confirmed Brian Gutierrez and, as of now, Jay Davia will be missing the game Saturday, both serving a 1-match suspension for their red cards that they earned on Sunday. Brian Gutierrez for violent conduct, and Jay Davia for a second yellow in the box that, as of right, it could be appealed and overturned, but it doesn't seem to be that will be happening. And the last bit of thing we'll point out here, it has now been officially confirmed. Chicago Fire will take on Minnesota United on July 8th at 7 p.m. in Minnesota. So exciting times there. Obviously, we'll talk more about that as it comes along. But we will talk a little bit about Orlando to actually kick things off here. They're currently leading Atlanta 2-1 as we record this. It's late in the first half. Tim, you mentioned it as we got on. Orlando 12 unbeaten in MLS, longest streak without losing or conceding a goal in MLS history. Is that kind of 0-0 draw streak they went on?
Exactly. That plus they scored 3 and gave up nothing against Inter Miami in that one game, I believe. No, wait. Who was that opponent? I'm trying to remember. It's been a while.
Miami. So to add on, right?
And then the 3, and then a 3-0 win against Atlanta. Sorry, 0-0 draw against the Fire. Not including the game against the Rowdies in that because it's the Open Cup, and then they conceded 3 against the Revolution. So it's been like a really strong stretch for them. 12 unbeaten, maybe going on 13 is incredible. But when you don't score in 4 of them, it's not as impressive as it could otherwise be.
Important to note, they did just lose two caveats as we talk about this, right? First, they did just lose to Nashville 3-2 in Open Cup, right? And that was not an overly rotated side. I don't think they started everybody, but it was not purely young guys. They were trying to win that game. And the other side of the coin, too, I was looking back through this record and just pulling together who they won. In terms of the notable wins, right? The important stuff. A 3-0 win over Miami, which is nice. Maybe not as good as it felt at the time. And a 1-0 win over.
It was still an impressive dismantling, though, in rivalry week, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then a 1-0 win over Portland. The other wins in this streak coming over Atlanta, Charlotte, who is, kind of mid-table in the East, and then LA Galaxy and DC United, two teams that are competing for the wooden spoon right now. So definitely a little bit of a scheduling break, but still an impressive feat as we are entering the, almost at the end of May, and they haven't lost since, what is that, March? It's early March.
March 8th.
Last time they
I want to
lost.
say, it is March 8th against NYCFC. And that was a 1-2 loss, right? So we talked about them a couple weeks ago, and it was like they're not allowing a lot of goals. They've allowed 3 once. They've allowed 4 once. That was their first game of the season against Philly. And like that's kind of been it. I mean, other than the US Open Cup game where they did allow 3.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the place I'll start here, right? Kind of twofold. One, what are you expecting to see from Orlando? Do we think we'll see any kind of tactical adjustments based on what we saw against the Fire a couple of weeks ago at home? And the other side of the coin is this will be Orlando's 8th game since the start of May, right? So 8 games in 4 weeks. They played midweek every week in May. So curious to hear, Tim, kind of what your thoughts on if you think we're going to see kind of more of the same, or if they'll come in with a different kind of tactical mindset.
Yeah, it looks like they've made a couple of adjustments here and there during the streak, which is kind of impressive, right? Like when you're like, this is working, but we could work better. Past couple matches, including the one that we're currently watching against Atlanta, they've been playing out of a 4-4-2, which is a little bit new. Basically moving to having two strikers. And that, I think, partly reflects just the number of strikers they've got in the squad in that one. And it also, I think, partly reflects the difficulty they were having creating chances when they were playing a system that only had one of their strikers that was kind of advanced on the pitch. Now, ahead of them, they kind of been playing sort of like a kind of like, or behind them, a box midfield. Cesar Arujo has been looking pretty good in that system. He kind of like gets a little bit more advanced than anyone else. He's got a goal against Atlanta. And in striker, they're currently playing Martin Ojeda and Ramiro Enrique. And I think that they played the other 2 strikers the previous game, which would be Duncan McGuire and Luis Mariel. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw them rotate at least one of the guys that we're seeing today off and brought on fresh legs for one of that pair on the game on Saturday.
Yeah, 100%. I think kind of just an interesting thought on, we talked about, I think in the last preview, Luis Mariel and his profile not being one that is particularly threatening to the Fire back line, right? Just in terms of he is a very smart player, a very talented player, but he is not like the most physically gifted, isn't the fastest, and that hasn't seemed to be what's bothered Jack Elliott. Previous game, obviously Christopher Cup started, played a full 90. I don't expect to see that. I think Sam Rogers has played well enough that you kind of leave him in that spot for the time being. Obviously, we'll have to see on that one, right? I do think we'll talk a little bit about transition a little bit to the Fire here.
Well, one other thing though, just on Orlando. The other thing to note, Alex Freeman has been, I think, one of the breakout players and one of the best stories of around the league this season. Right? I mean, it's like he is suddenly the question that's been posed for like my entire life around the sport, which is like, what if our best athletes played soccer? And like now we've got a guy that looks like our best athlete playing soccer. And I think it was David Goss that pointed this out. Like he's also a product of having professional academies around, because otherwise with him in his profile, he's 6'2" now. He's been tall his whole life, right? Like when you're getting raised in how to play sports by an NFL player, like you're going to have explosive speed. You're going to have someone that helps you use the physical gifts that you've got. He would have been a striker on any team, even like at an elite level, his entire life, right? But in an academy setup where the goal isn't just like, we're going to win some games as a club team, but like, we are going to develop you to be a professional. He was transitioned into a fullback role or wingback role, fairly early on. And that let him develop sides of his game that he wouldn't have to or wouldn't have had to otherwise. We've seen players transition from attacking positions to, positions like deeper down the pitch and sometimes vice versa, as they kind of move up in the ranks or like advance in their career. That's always harder. He's had, professional training and experience doing that from a very young age. And I think that that's part of what's showing. He's going to be out. And he has been a big part of, I think, Orlando's success. A little bit, maybe like flying a tiny bit under the radar until recently. He will be with the U.S. men's national team. So ironically, although he will be in Chicago, he will not be playing in that one.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's a great call out. Especially for a game that was so defensive minded, right? And this team that has, I feel like, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, Tim, it has kind of felt like a majority of their defensive strength has come from, on that back line, I'll say, from the fullbacks, right? Not the most impressive center back pairing. Obviously, Galese is a very talented keeper. We saw that, right, when they came to Chicago. So him being out of that game, it does actually raise an interesting question, right, of, this isn't necessarily the next thing we had, but maybe worth talking about. You look at that left side, and I kind of raised the question a little bit on the recap of last week of, are we going to see Marin Haile Selassie this week, right? And now being down Alex Freeman, right, being down one of their better defensive players, one of their better players overall, do you maybe slot in the faster, quicker, maybe a little more dynamic, at least as we've seen him lately, Marin Haile Selassie on that left side, to try and take advantage of that, or even bump him up to the right wing, let Philip Zinkernagel play on the left and try and work his way inward from there, and see how he plays against Andrew Gutman. Kind of curious your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting prospect. To be honest, we've seen Greg kind of like stick with his guys a fair amount. Not that there haven't been some changes. I think that your latter suggestion is maybe the one that intrigues me more, just with the idea that like Bamba has been sort of getting quieter a little bit in parts of games. He's gotten noisier lately, but he just looks like a guy that could maybe use a little bit of a break. Zinkernagel probably could if we're being honest, but he hasn't looked like he's needed it as much, and like you got to win some football games. So you probably keep rolling with him, putting him on the left, and then allowing Marin to start on the right. I think could create some interesting trouble for Orlando's back line. And like to some extent, it's like if you are adding that extra dimension on the left or something that they weren't quite expecting, then even if that's still like it, with Freeman out, you can run more stuff on the right then. And like there's, the ability to move attacks around, I think really helps you in games as opposed to being predictable.
Yes.
I think the challenge is going to be a little bit like figuring out when to make adjustments if that looks like it's not working, because that could really be something that could, I think, trip the fire up if they're trying something they haven't tried before.
Yeah, I guess I do. The big thing that I was thinking about coming into this is, we all, I think, kind of said both during the game and as we were talking about it after, Hugo Kuipers looked exhausted. He didn't have the gas. He's played virtually every minute of every game at this point, at least in the last month, right, I'll say. So there is an aspect of he needs a little help, right? We know how talented he is. We know how capable he is. I do think he is missing a piece of his game right now, or was last week, I should say, because he was hung out to dry a little bit, right? When the Fire went to that more defensive setup, right, three in the back, and we talked that to death already. You saw multiple times the ball came forward and he had nobody around him, right? And it wasn't through a fault. It was everybody was back defending, so there was no transition. So I do wonder how much of, frankly, Marin's speed, Marin's freshness to provide kind of that burst forward. And then he is still good in hold-up play, right? He's not somebody who's going to be dispossessed easily. So if you can get him, I like the idea of pairing him on the right with, with Leonardo Barroso if he's going to be back, or even Jonathan Dean because he's got a decent amount of straight line speed, of getting him down into the corner, opening up that side of the field, and then allowing the rest of the team to rotate forward. Because I think Hugo needs that right now. And I don't think, I don't think we're going to see Tom Barlow for more than 20, 30 minutes of this game max. You're not going to start Tom Barlow. And frankly, I don't know what the answer is with Jonathan Bamba right now, but he has not been impactful enough that I think he is deserving of a guaranteed 100% you're going to start every week.
Well, I don't think anybody should be, right, and I don't think that that's a knock against any player or even any performance. It's just an
No,
admission that it's a very long season, and that, like, no matter what, like, you are going to have times when you just maybe don't have the match fitness or somebody else has sharpness, and like that is fine. Um, Now, you know, Bamba was a halftime sub against NYCFC, so like the fact that he didn't play 90, um, I think that's maybe the one of the only times. I think the only other time that he only played 45 was against Nashville. And other than that, when we've seen him subbed off, it's been like
I
15 minutes or
think
so left in the game.
he also came out in the last Orlando game, if I remember correctly. He's been their red card sub, if I'm making my recollection.
You know what? You're right. Yeah, he came off in the 40th minute or so. So that's right when the red card was.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that but again, like the fact that he didn't play 90, like maybe that, gives him something else. I don't know. I think it's an interesting problem for Berhalter to solve, and will depend a little bit on like what he's seeing in training and attitude and stuff like that we don't really get to see as closely, even when we get to go see training, because we're not that close to it. Because I think the Fire's attack is obviously the most dynamic and electric if you've got an active, energized Jonathan Bamba in it. I don't know what you do when you're like, because nobody's 100%. So like, what do you do if you're like Greg and you're thinking he's at 90% of that, or he's at 80%? Like, when's the point where you say other options suddenly become better? And I think that's a difficult choice to make. I think though, in terms of what you're saying about Hugo, I think part of it is we saw him tracking back so much, which obviously game state being down a man for a lot and stuff like that, like it's good that he can be that committed to both sides of the ball. But like, you just got to simplify the game and make so that he doesn't have to do that as much. I'm not saying like let him be Lionel Messi out there, but like maybe let him be a little bit like Lionel Messi. And like, if it's going past like the 38th yard or something like that, you're like, I think I'm good here. You guys go over there. Just get it back to me. All right, see you guys later.
Yeah, I do think there's an aspect of his game, right? And is that we've seen it this year. We didn't see it as much last year. Call it tactics, call it adjusting to the league, whatever you want. He is incredibly dynamic in midfield, right? Just in terms of how he can create, how he can advance play. And I think you're losing some of that by asking him to be the forward man. Like, it's not that he can't play and hold up, right? It's not that he can't move the ball forward. It's not that he can't break out if he needs to. But I do think you're losing an aspect of what makes him special if you are asking him to be the guy to advance the ball, right? That's why we've seen such great work out of Philip Zinkernagel, out of Leonardo Barroso when he was healthy. And I think the only concern I have with Bamba right now from a larger picture, right, just to kind of go off the other thing you said, I think he and Philip Zinkernagel are a little alike in some ways, right? I think they both want to get to the interior. They both want to play with the ball at their feet. The problem is Jonathan Bamba isn't really accomplishing anything like that right now. He's not breaking through lines. We've seen him have some really great goals, right? Like we saw a few weeks ago. But those are few and far between. And it doesn't seem like he's looking to make the pass when he gets those opportunities the way Philip Zinkernagel has. And so I wonder how much of just making that a little more dynamic on the outside could change the game.
Yeah, I think that's a good perspective on that. Again, it's an interesting challenge, right? And in some ways, it's a good problem to have, because like the Fire have not had an attacker that is that dynamic up the left side in a long time. But at the same time, like, you got to win games. And again, like, Marin Haile-Selassie has been like, I don't know what else from his perspective he could possibly be doing to make the case that he should be getting more minutes and starting, right? Like, he has been doing it all in the minutes he's been given. And I think that there's, still, I think, a fair case to be made that like maybe the attack is better if it's Bamba and Zinkernagel a lot of the time, just because of the talent level, what those guys are like, all that, like that's fair. But, I do sort of wonder, in my mind, early on when we saw Bamba being really electric, it was stuff like that. The opening game, connecting with Guti for those goals, he was getting into dangerous spaces, but ultimately laying off passes, being unselfish. Greg said that he won attacking more, shooting more, stuff like that. And the goal that he had, admittedly, against the heavily rotated Rev squad in the Open Cup just was kind of like the proof of concept for exactly what you want to see from that, right? Like he just like confidently like worked his way to the center of the pitch and just curled the ball in. Like that was that, right? I don't know if he's going to be doing that week in and week out in MLS, but I think what he can do week in and week out is what we've seen Zinkernagel do so effectively, which is that playing the ball for other people and stuff like that. Maybe it's as simple as like, all right, we're going to start Marn Haile Selassie in this one and just give Bamba a little bit of time to think about things and like maybe give him a game state that suits him more, coming off as like a super sub role off the bench at some point. It can be a planned substitution and seeing if that gets more out of him. And then once the performance is kind of reset a little bit, then kind of, start him again.
Yeah. And this kind of use this as an opportunity to transition a little bit. But the other thought I kind of had as we think about this, the Fire are going to be down a minimum of 2, likely 3 midfielders, right? We are right now knowing Brian Gutierrez will not be playing. We're knowing Jay Davia as of right now, as of recording, is not going to be playing. And Mauricio Pineda did not train with the team today. I would expect maybe an abundance of caution in a game where you're already missing a few guys.
Well, and he didn't, let's be honest, it did not look like he was feeling great with the way that he went off.
And he was struggling before he came out too. He was down in the box for a minute or two, played for a few more minutes, and then came out of the game. So not expecting to see Mauricio Pineda. Obviously, hope to find out more tomorrow. But I do wonder if there's an aspect of you're down in the midfield, you're missing that creative spark. Do you maybe slide to more of a 4-2-3-1, move Philip Zinkernagel inside? Because we, candidly, didn't love what we saw from Monique Kwame. It did not look to be himself, so we think he may not be at 100%. Do you maybe slide Kellen Acosta next to Sergio Orahel, put in Marin on the wing, and just try to play to your strengths as opposed to sticking to the system and being maybe overly rigid?
Yeah, and I think that's also an interesting question. I think who's going to play in the midfield, I think it's something we talked about a little bit and teased a little bit in the last episode, but I think it's a worthy discussion here of how do you handle it? I think Sergio Orahel is probably the one that you look to provide as much of the attacking sense as you possibly can. I mean, he's not Guti, but he can do some things that Guti I think can also do, but isn't primarily tasked with, like really good long passes, stuff like that. We've seen Orahel do everything short of getting a goal, like ringing one, off the fingertips, off the post against Toronto. Maybe this is the kind of game where he could get his first goal because he's going to be asked to be doing more of that. I think that next to him, I think that the question is like, who else do you have? I think Kwame is the obvious one. If he looks like he's fit or whatever, because he did not look 1,000% last game. And again, I have no idea what was up with that. It could have just been not his day. It could have been something else. And then, like legitimately, this is sort of like show us something, Kellen time for Kellen Acosta.
This to me it's certainly not the last chance, but this is a day of Kellen Acosta, right? And I almost think I'll probably touch on a little bit more when we talk predictions, but this is a game where you kind of have to, you take your medicine a little bit, you throw it at the wall and see what sticks, right? If he was not suspended, I would say start Jay Davia and just see what happens, right? Like at this point, like might as well. I think you need 90 minutes from Kellen Acosta. You just do. Frankly, because he, from the perspective of the outside, behind the scenes in the locker room, it seems like he is doing everything right. You haven't heard a peep from him negatively. Greg has been over like effusive in his praise in terms of him accepting this new role, which is obviously not what he expected when he got here. And so it seems like he's doing everything right from that perspective. And I think at a certain point, all due respect to Mauricio Pineda, I've loved him as a midfielder for years now, right? But you do need to give Kellen that opportunity. He's going to have at least one game, if not two, where I think he's going to have the opportunity to win that spot. And you just need to give it to him and let him kind of take that opportunity. And if he doesn't sees it, you kind of wash your hands and say, we gave you the opportunity and it didn't work out. But this is a Kellen Acosta game to me. This is a Marin Haile Selassie game because, frankly, the deficits just show that you need to try it.
Yeah. And I think that like Pineda, like you said, Pineda, like he looks like will not be an option for this one. You know, Sam Williams is brought in as a Fire 2 player. He got some first-time games. He looked better than I think anyone had a right to expect him to look, given the situation in those first-time games. I don't think you trust him to be a first-time player all the time. And I mean, the fact that we're even talking about, like, do you play a guy that was brought in to be a Fire 2 player or a guy that 3.5 years ago was playing in a World Cup for the United States men's national team? And winning MLS Cup, what was that, like a month before that? I mean, that just seems like a crazy conversation. And Acosta is not just under contract for this year, he's under contract for 2026 as well. So, he could potentially be moved. Like, it's getting to the point where, like, if you don't trust him in a game like this, do you just have to eat as much of the salary as you can and, as you need to, and trade him to a team that will give him some minutes? Or do you like buy him out next year, which just seems like a waste of time for him in the Fire? It's not great. But again, like I think that's not what happens, because I think you do have to just put him in this game.
Yeah, I agree completely. And that's where it is kind of like, frankly, you look at who's available for this game and you kind of have to ask yourself the question of like, what does next year look like, right? Because Romani Kwame is on a loan. The longer the season goes, I don't expect it to be picked up. He's played fine, but it's not something like Marin. Like Marin comes over and immediately it was like, yeah, this guy's staying, right? You can just tell. And now with the added depth of Sam Williams, with Sergio Orgel's emergence, I don't think you're going to add a player of Kwame's level.
So and I think that's why it was smart of them to make it on a loan. And I kind of wonder if on some level that was the plan of like, we have a lot of midfielders here. We think this is an interesting option for us. But we have to wonder, like, but do we have the pieces internally? And this gives us an insurance policy on one hand, because, as a Fire learning right now, like sometimes you can never have too many midfielders. And on the other side, if it works out great, you win because you got a good player. If it doesn't work out, you just lost a guy on loan for a season. You know what I mean? It's not a huge cap hit. You're not committing.
Yeah, exactly. Best case, it works out. You keep him. Worst case, you just let him go. But that is the idea of if you're picking between him and Kellen Acosta, I think you have to roll with Kellen in that situation because you need to see what you have, right? You need to give him that opportunity to earn a spot back, and it's up to him if he does or not. But obviously, we'll hope that he does. And so, yeah, and I would almost say a similar idea for Sam Williams, right? We saw him perform certainly not better than the heights of Romani Kwame, but certainly the lows were not as low, right? He just had solid, consistent performances in those 2 or 3 matches where he featured as a starter, right? This kid's 20 years old. He's on a homegrown contract. He's going to be here for the future. He's a guy that he almost strikes me as not as Sergio Orgel, right? But in some ways, he almost strikes me as a Kellen Acosta type, right? Like if you look up in 10 years and that guy's still in MLS, are you shocked? 2 games is a lot, is nothing to base it off of, but that's how you build a winning team, right? Is you take these guys who are at this level and you develop them.
Well, and he's an interesting player that like a lot of teams had an interest in. The Fire had to fight to get those rights from the Red Bull. So like that's, it's not that like you can't have multiple scouts wrong, and like not that you can't have a player that's got a lot of promise at a young age and then it doesn't pan out for anybody. But that just goes to show like this isn't like out of nowhere and a flash in the pan. This is a player that a lot of smart people have kind of believed in the potential of, which goes to your point of like he could be playing in MLS or elsewhere in 10 years and it wouldn't be surprising.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from there, that's about all I've got, Tim. Anything else you want to kind of toss in before we move to our predictions here?
No, it's been a lot. I mean, like I said, I think this is going to be an interesting test for Greg's ability to deal with challenging situations after things have been a little bit more set. We saw early on when it was just like stuff was getting thrown at him and there were injuries all over the place and like he kind of had to make do. And the Fire got some good results there. I think it's going to be interesting to see if we see something else now, especially because the extra tape that he's got on like all the things we talked about, Marin knocking at the door for minutes, about, Bamba sometimes disappearing for a little bit, about, all those things. And so I think it'll be an interesting challenge. And, Orlando, such a long winning streak. It looks like it's in an okay spot to continue against Atlanta. They've got the lead when we're recording. But it just seems like for a team that has been winning that many or undefeated in that many games, it just feels like kind of like the most beatable team you could encounter in that situation, as weird as that sounds to say. So,
Yeah. Well, so all that said, Tim, the question remains, who you got?
I kind of feel like it's going to be a Fire 2-1 victory. Like it seems like they held Orlando. Orlando did not show any of the attacking prowess they're showing against Atlanta right now. When the Fire were facing them, even when the Fire had a man deficit. So if you play against them like that on one side of the ball and just have that extra dude, and not a goalkeeper getting his first minutes in MLS ever, then, I think that's enough to propel the team to victory.
Yeah. I'm going to do what I swear I never try to when I gamble. And I'm going to hedge a little bit here. I think if we see, a simple switch of Kwame and Acosta for Gutierrez and Pineda, I think it's going to be just a lineup like that. I think it'll be probably 2-0 Orlando. I just don't think that. I don't know that that'll have the juice, right? To be totally honest, I think Orlando is in better form. I think the Fire are going to be missing that creative spark in the midfield, and I think my worry, right, is that it would just be stale. I think the other side of the coin, if you see a bit of a rotation in maybe an unexpected way, right, of maybe getting Leonardo Barroso back and having Jonathan Dean come off the bench, starting Marin Haile Selassie, starting Kellen Acosta and Sergio Orhel, maybe with Philip Zinchenko centrally, something like that, right? I think that's a game where you could very easily see a 2-1 win for the Fire. But I think more likely to me is probably something in that 2-0 range. I think Orlando's offense has improved. They also do not have a game until June 13th after this. So they are really going to go, I think, all out. They're going to look at this as, hey, let's just get through this. We're going to have 2 weeks off. We're going to be able to rest. And I think just a really, really tough spot for the Fire to be on the road, down 2 midfielders. And I think the guys are just kind of on tired legs. Now they're on a short week too.
Yeah, I mean, Orlando will be on tireder legs, though, and I think that's the thing. It has literally every making you could possibly have for a trap game for them in that sense.
100%.
Like long winning streak against the team that they, had a draw against. Like I said, they didn't have a lot going forward, but they figured things out. But then, again, rotation, missing a key piece. I think it'll be... So who knows? But I think
I'd love to be wrong
to the trap game if you're going to believe in that, right?
100%. And who knows? Maybe this time Galacio gets sent out in the 40th minute and they'll have to play with 10 men. Tough to say. But that feels like as good a place to wrap as always. Thank you so much for being here and giving us a listen, letting us talk a whole bunch of ball directly into your ears. We always appreciate that. As always, keep an eye on the website, meninred97.com. It's where you'll find wonderful reporting from Tim, from Alex, from Max, all things Chicago Fire that you could ever want to know or need to know. Keep an eye on the socials as well, at meninred97 everywhere that matters, and MIR97 pods on Twitter for podcast-specific updates. We do have a new episode of Hot Takes coming out as of recording. It's tomorrow. If you're listening on debut, it'll be tonight. So Thursday, May 29th. It'll be myself. I believe the whole gang's going to be there. Matt, Paul, and Joe talking to you, hearing your takes, and maybe yelling at each other. Definitely yelling at each other, actually. But that's always a good time. So come on over to YouTube, check that out as well. And thank you so much for being here again. It means the world to us. If wherever you're listening, you could subscribe, like, share, rate, whatever it is. All that stuff helps it go a long way. But yeah, it's been so wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for joining us around the bonfire. Shout out to Austin, our producer, for making us sound good. The beat's probably already playing. But yeah, thanks for joining us around the bonfire. Come on, you men are red.